They said the city had only hours left, yet its walls still stood, cracked, trembling, bleeding dust like an old titan, refusing to fall. On the final night, as the Ottoman cannon screamed across the Bosphorus and fires climbed the sky, eyewitnesses swore they heard something else beneath the chaos, the heartbeat of an empire dying in real time.
On the morning of May 28, 1453, Constantinople, the last gem of the Byzantine Empire, woke beneath a sky stained by the smoke of 1,000 Ottoman campfires. For 53 days, the city had endured the thunder of cannons, the shudder of shattered masonry, and the relentless pressure of an army nearly 10 times the size of its own dwindling defenders. Its citizens had stopped asking if the city would fall. The question had become when. Along the Theodosian walls, Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos inspected the ramparts slowly, almost ceremonially. His armor, once polished bronze, wore a mosaic of dents and blackened scorch marks from weeks of bombardment. His face showed exhaustion, but not surrender. Chroniclers later claimed he moved as if carrying the weight of every century that had shaped the empire, every triumph, every betrayal, every forgotten battle whose echoes still hung in the stones beneath his boots. The defenders around him were a patchwork of nations: weary Byzantines, the proud Genoese led by Giovanni Giustiniani, Venetian sailors with their salt-scarred armor, and a scattering of volunteers from distant lands who refused to let the great Christian capital die without a fight. Food had grown scarce, ammunition scarcer, hope nearly non-existent. Still, they stood. Beyond the moat, the Ottoman camp stretched like a living sea. At its center rose the crimson tent of Sultan Mehmed II, young, brilliant, ruthlessly determined. Barely 21 years old, he had brought with him a vision of empire and a monstrous bombard engineered by the Hungarian master Orban. Its iron mouth had been roaring day and night, chewing the city's ancient walls into a grieving ruin. By late afternoon, scouts rushed into the emperor's presence with grim news. The Ottomans were preparing for a final, all-out assault. Mehmed had ordered his troops to rest, eat, and pray. At midnight, the great crescent banners would be raised, drums would thunder, and the last storm of Constantinople would begin. As the sun fell, the city entered a strange stillness. Market squares that once echoed with merchants and sailors now lay empty, littered with broken tiles and shattered icons. In Hagia Sophia, thousands gathered beneath the towering dome, its golden mosaics glimmering faintly in the torchlight. Priests chanted hymns that had risen within those walls for nearly 1,000 years. Some wept openly, others clutched their children. Many admitted quietly that they were witnessing the final vespers of the Byzantine world. Outside, the emperor rode through the streets, accompanied only by a small escort. People knelt as he passed. Chroniclers say he dismounted again and again, lifting children, blessing old men, promising frightened mothers that he would die before abandoning them. Whether every detail is true or not hardly matters. The city felt, for one brief hour, the unity it had lost long ago.
When night finally swallowed the horizon, the defenders returned to their posts. Torches flickered along the ramparts. The Genoese adjusted their crossbows. Byzantine archers whispered prayers. Exhausted cannon crews loaded the few remaining shots they possessed. Giustiniani walked the parapets with a calm, steady presence. Though wounded and weakened from earlier bombardments, he refused to leave the lines. Then, sometime past midnight, the earth began to tremble. At first, it was rhythmic, hundreds of feet marching in unison. Then came the drums, deep and relentless. Then the horns, sharp as metal, ripping open the night. And finally, the roar of tens of thousands of voices rising together as the Ottoman infantry surged forward. The final siege had begun. The first wave, composed of irregular azaps, charged across the narrow bridges placed over the moat. Their purpose was brutal and simple: to die and exhaust the defenders. Arrows rained on them from the walls, cutting down dozens at a time, but still they came, scaling ladders, hurling torches, smashing against the weakened gates. For more than an hour the defenders repelled them. Blood soaked the base of the walls, but the city held. Then came the second wave, Mehmed's disciplined Anatolian troops. These men advanced with shields raised, ladders carried with precision, and siege hooks glinting under the torchlight. Their assault struck harder, more focused, pushing the defenders into desperate hand-to-hand combat on the battered ramparts. Giustiniani fought at the center of the fray, his armor gleaming beneath bursts of fire. He moved with practiced ferocity, rallying the defenders each time the Ottomans gained ground. Arrows clattered off his shield. An explosion from a small cannon showered him with stone fragments. Still, he remained unbroken. But the night was long, and the city's defenders were finite. As the darkest hours before dawn approached, smoke and dust choked the battlements. Fires burned unchecked. Sections of the outer wall had collapsed into jagged heaps, forming deadly funnels through which fighting surged endlessly. The defenders fought not for victory, but for time. Each minute bought at the cost of another life. Meanwhile, in his command tent, Sultan Mehmed calmly prepared the third and final wave. His elite janissaries, disciplined, fearless, raised from childhood for war, waited in silence. When the order finally came, they moved as a single entity, stepping toward the walls with measured, terrifying purpose. The moment they advanced, something inside the city seemed to shift, as if its ancient stones sensed the empire's last hour approaching.
The Janissaries reached the walls just as the eastern sky began to pale with the first hint of dawn. Their torches flickered against their polished helmets, and their boots struck the earth with a steady, mechanical rhythm. Unlike the earlier waves, they did not shout, did not roar, did not attempt to overwhelm with noise. Their silence was more terrifying than any war cry. They moved up the rubble of fallen masonry with disciplined ease, raising shields to block the few surviving cannons and archers still firing from the ramparts. Where ladders failed, they climbed directly over stones slick with blood. The defenders met them with swords and spears, but exhaustion weighed on every movement. Many had been awake for days. Some had been fighting for nearly 7 straight hours. At a breach near the gate of St. Romanus, the situation grew desperate. The Janissaries pushed relentlessly toward the top of the wall, and the defenders, Byzantines and Genoese standing side by side, began to buckle. Emperor Constantine rode to the site, dismounted, and joined the line. His presence sparked a final surge of resistance. For a brief, miraculous moment, the defenders beat back the assault. But then, disaster struck. Giustiniani, while leading a counterattack along the parapet, was hit by a cannon fragment or arrow, accounts differ, and collapsed. Blood poured from a deep wound in his side. His men saw their leader fall and panicked. Some begged him to stay, others insisted he be carried to safety. Word spread along the walls like lightning. Giustiniani is wounded. Giustiniani is leaving. The morale of the defenders shattered. The Genoese began to retreat. Byzantine soldiers, thinking the line was doomed, fell back in confusion. The Janissaries sensed the hesitation instantly. With renewed force, they surged into the breach. Constantine tried to rally his men, shouting above the chaos, grabbing fleeing soldiers and turning them back toward the fight. But momentum had shifted. The pressure was overwhelming. more sections of the wall began to collapse under the concentrated assault. Meanwhile, in the northern part of the city, near the Kirkapata, an obscure postern gate, rarely mentioned in official records, something disastrous occurred. Whether left unlocked by accident, forced open in the chaos, or opened deliberately by traitors remains one of history's most debated mysteries. What is certain is that a group of Ottoman soldiers discovered the opening and slipped inside. They climbed the inner walls and raised an Ottoman banner before anyone realized what had happened. When the defenders nearby saw the flag fluttering atop the battlements, they believed the city had already been overwhelmed. Panic spread in all directions. Commanders shouted contradicting orders. Civilians watching from a distance fainted, screamed, or fled into the streets. Within minutes, the psychological blow proved as deadly as any cannon. The Janissaries pushed deeper into the city. More troops poured through the breaches near the St. Romanus Gate. The defenders fought in desperate knots, forming small circles of resistance, but they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The sound of swords clashing, men crying out, and armor grinding against stone became a ceaseless storm. As daylight fully broke over Constantinople, smoke rose from burning towers. The air grew thick with dust from collapsing ramparts. Greek historians would later write that the city seemed to groan, as if the spirit of Byzantium felt its own destruction sweeping through its streets. Near the Lycus Valley, Constantine made a final attempt to rally the defenders. He stood on the broken inner rampart, surrounded by a dwindling group of loyal soldiers. His voice rose above the chaos. "Whoever wishes to escape, let him go. For me, I fight for my city, for my people, and for my faith."
Those words became the last recorded speech of the last Byzantine emperor. Moments later, he charged into the thickest fighting, disappearing into the crush of Janissaries. Eyewitnesses disagreed on the exact manner of his death. Some claimed he was cut down by several blades at once. Others insisted he fell only after killing many. A few believed his body was never found because the Ottomans feared the symbolism of displaying a fallen emperor. Regardless of the truth, Constantine XI Palaiologos became legend in that final stand. With the emperor gone and the walls breached beyond repair, the defense collapsed entirely. Ottoman soldiers poured through the city streets in every direction. Civilians fled toward the harbor, only to find many ships already seized or burned. Some ran to monasteries, barricading themselves inside. Others rushed toward Hagia Sophia, believing the sanctity of the great cathedral might protect them. Its massive doors closed just as thousands crowded inside. From the outside, the last defenders could hear chanting echoing beneath the dome. Prayers rising for mercy, for deliverance, for a miracle that would not come. As the Ottomans secured the ramparts and opened the main gates from within, Mehmed II entered the city. He rode slowly, surveying the ruins of the defenses with a steady, unreadable expression. He had dreamed of this moment since childhood, the conquest of the greatest Christian city in the East, the final extinguishing of the Byzantine flame. But he did not celebrate immediately. Instead, he issued strict orders forbidding unnecessary destruction of buildings. He wanted Constantinople intact, not razed, so he could transform it into the capital of a new empire. Even so, the chaos of conquest surged ahead of his commands. Soldiers raced through the markets and homes, looting whatever they could find. Fires ignited from overturned lanterns. Smoke curled into the morning sky. Screams echoed from narrow alleys as families tried to hide or escape. Near the harbor, a group of Venetian sailors attempted one last counterattack, hoping to protect fleeing civilians. They clashed with Ottoman infantry amid overturned carts and broken ships. For a moment, the defenders held,
creating a tiny pocket of resistance that allowed several boats to escape into the open sea. But they were eventually surrounded and overwhelmed. By mid-morning, the Ottomans reached Hagia Sophia. The massive bronze doors were battered with axes and hammers. Inside, the terrified crowd huddled beneath the dome as the doors splintered and crashed inward. Ottoman soldiers flooded the basilica, their armor echoing across the marble floors. Priests holding icons were pulled away. Families were separated in the chaos. The cathedral that had stood for nearly a millennium as the heart of orthodoxy became a captive prize in a single hour. When news reached Mehmed that Hagia Sophia had been taken, he rode there at once. Entering the great basilica, he looked up at the domed ceiling, its gold mosaics flickering in the smoky light. Then he dismounted, stooped, and picked up a handful of earth. Letting the dust slip through his fingers, he proclaimed the building the property of the Ottoman state. Later, it would be transformed into a mosque. Outside, the city continued to burn.
By noon, most organized resistance had ended. The defenders who still fought did so in isolated pockets. Groups of monks wielding makeshift weapons, merchants protecting families behind overturned tables, soldiers refusing to surrender even when surrounded. The Ottomans moved systematically through each district, extinguishing these last sparks of defiance. Smoke drifted over the city like a shroud. The streets were littered with broken shields, shattered icons, torn banners of the double-headed eagle. The once great metropolis of Constantine the Great lay silent, except for the distant crash of falling towers and the murmured prayers of those trapped in hiding. At the Blachernay Palace, imperial servants attempted to burn documents and valuables before the invaders arrived. They succeeded only partially. Ottoman cavalry breached the palace gates, and the defenders inside threw down their weapons. The palace was taken intact, though the throne room, once resplendent with mosaics and silken banners, was already stripped by opportunistic soldiers. In the afternoon light, Mehmed II rode toward the ancient center of the city. His retinue followed at a respectful distance, watching as he surveyed each district with deliberate attention. He seemed to absorb the enormity of his victory in silence. The city that had resisted for more than 1,000 years had fallen to him in a single morning. As he approached the Forum of Constantine, he halted. The great column of the emperor towered above the ruins, its bronze capital gleaming faintly through the haze. Here, Mehmed paused to deliver a short proclamation to his officers. Constantinople would not be destroyed, but reborn. It would become the seat of a new empire, a city not of the past, but of the future. His soldiers spread the order. Fires were to be contained, major structures protected, wanton destruction punished. Slowly, the chaos began to subside. Patrols moved through the streets, extinguishing flames and clearing debris. Civilians emerged from hiding, trembling, starving, soot-covered. Some were escorted to gathering points. Others were taken as captives. The city's fate was sealed, yet its life was not extinguished. That evening, as the sun sank behind the Theodosian walls, the sounds of fighting faded entirely. Torches flickered atop the breached ramparts. Ottoman banners fluttered from towers where the Byzantine cross had flown since late antiquity. The city that for centuries had been the beating heart of the Eastern Roman Empire was now under new dominion.
Inside Hagia Sophia, Mehmed returned once more before nightfall. The cathedral, dimly lit by scattered lanterns, was eerily quiet. Dust drifted through beams of fading sunlight. The mosaics of Christ and the saints glittered faintly beneath soot and shadow. He walked across the marble floor to the altar, paused, and then ordered that preparations begin to convert the basilica into a mosque. The echoes of chanting from earlier that day seemed almost to linger in the cavernous space.
Outside, groups of Ottoman architects and engineers inspected the ruined gates and breaches. Plans were already being formed to repair the walls, rebuild the harbor, and restore the palaces. Mehmed's vision for the city extended far beyond conquest. He intended to resurrect Constantinople as Istanbul, the jewel of his growing empire. Meanwhile, stories spread among survivors of the emperor's final charge. Some whispered that he had been seen fighting atop the inner rampart until overwhelmed by janissaries. Others insisted that he had disguised himself among the fallen to escape, destined to return in a distant age. These legends, born from desperation and grief, would echo for centuries. In the quiet neighborhoods near the Golden Horn, families gathered to mourn. Mothers searched for missing sons. Children whispered in frightened tones about the thunder of cannons and the sea of soldiers that had poured into the city. Priests tried to console their flocks, offering words of hope even as their own world had collapsed. As darkness fell, Mehmed stood atop a hill overlooking the city. Thousands of campfires glowed like stars scattered across the landscape. The domes and towers of Constantinople rose in jagged silhouette against the horizon. For a long time, he said nothing. His commanders waited in silence. The night breeze carried the distant sound of crackling fires and murmured prayers. At last, he spoke softly. The conquest was complete, but the work of building an empire had only begun. Below him, Constantinople, the city of emperors, saints, and scholars, lay wounded but alive. Its walls were broken, its palaces breached, its people terrified. Yet beneath the rubble, the spirit of the city endured. It would reshape itself, adapt, and survive under a new name, a new ruler, a new faith. The last day of Byzantium was over. The first day of a new world had begun.